Nice section. This section isn't for people like you, boy. Find your actual seat in the back where you belong.
The words sliced through the pristine air of the first-class cabin like a blade through silk. Bradford Montgomery III didn't even glance at the boarding pass in Marcus Rivera's hand. He had already decided who belonged in Seat 1A, and it wasn't the young black man in the plain hoodie sitting there. Marcus looked up slowly from his phone, his dark eyes meeting Bradford's pale blue ones with a calmness that seemed to unnerve the older man. The expensive leather of Seat 1A creaked softly as Marcus shifted, but he didn't stand. He didn't flinch. He simply spoke, his voice steady and measured. "Sir, I have a valid ticket for this seat." Bradford's face flushed red, the color creeping up from his perfectly pressed collar to his silver hairline. At 58, he was a man accustomed to getting his way. The Armani suit, the $45,000 Patek Philippe, watch the silk pocket square folded with geometric precision. Everything about him screamed, old money, established power, unquestioned authority. "Listen here." Bradford stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper that carried clearly in the quiet cabin. "I am Bradford Montgomery III. I have flown this route every month for 15 years. That seat," he pointed a manicured finger at 1A, "has been mine since before you were probably born. The system clearly made a mistake putting you here." Marcus glanced at his phone screen, noting the time. 2:15 p.m. Miami International Airport Terminal H, Gate H24. Atlantic Elite Airways, Flight 891 to New York, JFK. The Boeing 777-300ER sat ready for departure, but something told him this flight would be anything but routine. "Mr. Montgomery," Marcus said, his voice carrying a hint of exhaustion. The past 96 hours of merger negotiations had left him drained, but this required his full attention. "I paid $18,000 for this ticket. I'm not moving." Bradford's jaw tightened, veins bulging in his neck. $18,000. He let out a harsh laugh. "I don't care if you claim you paid $100,000. Look at you." His eyes swept dismissively over Marcus's outfit, the black Fear of God hoodie, the dark jeans, the limited edition Jordan sneakers that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "You probably used food stamps to get here." The insult hung in the air like toxic smoke. Marcus felt something shift inside him, not anger exactly, but a cold recognition. He had dealt with Bradford Montgomery types his entire life. Men who believed the world was paved specifically for their leather loafers, who saw skin color before bank statements, who confused net worth with self-worth. "I suggest you check the passenger manifest," Marcus said quietly, pulling his headphones from around his neck. Very carefully. But Bradford was already turning away, snapping his fingers with the entitlement of someone who had never heard the word "no" directed at him personally. "Attendant Carmen." "Get over here immediately." Carmen Rodriguez hurried down the narrow aisle, her practiced smile already in place. At 45, she had 12 years of experience reading passenger dynamics, and what she saw made her stomach tighten. Bradford Montgomery Diamond Elite member spends over $300,000 annually, knows the airline's board members personally, standing red-faced next to a young black man in casual clothes occupying the premium seat. Her bias kicked in before she even spoke. Mr. Montgomery Carmen's voice dripped with honey as she addressed the older man. "What seems to be the problem here?" "This individual," Bradford spat, refusing to look at Marcus directly, "is refusing to vacate my seat. I want him moved immediately. To economy, where he belongs." Carmen turned to Marcus, and the honey in her voice evaporated instantly, replaced by cold steel. "Sir, I need to see your boarding pass." Marcus unlocked his phone with deliberate slowness, his thumb moving across the screen with the practiced ease of someone who lived in the digital world. The boarding pass appeared in crisp detail. Carter Marcus. Flight 891. Seat 1A. First class. The QR code gleamed authentically in the cabin lighting. Carmen stared at the screen, her eyes blinking rapidly. The boarding pass was legitimate, she could see that immediately. But then she looked back at Bradford Montgomery. Diamond Elite. VIP. A man who knew people who made calls who could end careers with a word to the right executive. This kid in the hoodie. Probably an upgrade, a fluke. Someone who used miles or caught a system error. Expendable. There seems to be a double booking situation. Carmen lied smoothly, not even bothering to check her tablet. Mr. Montgomery is a priority passenger with significant history with our airline. Sir, she addressed Marcus, her volume rising slightly so surrounding passengers could hear, I'm going to have to ask you to gather your belongings. We have a lovely seat available in premium economy. Marcus laughed, a dry, humorless sound that seemed to echo in the pressurized cabin. Premium economy. You're joking, right? I don't think you heard me clearly. Carmen's voice grew sharper, more authoritative. You are disrupting the boarding process. If you cannot cooperate with crew instructions, I will have to call the gate agent to have you escorted off this aircraft. Call him Marcus, said, leaning back in the leather seat and crossing his legs. Call the Pope if it makes you feel better. I paid for this seat. I'm staying in this seat. Other passengers were beginning to take notice now. In seat 2, B. Sarah Kim, a 22-year-old pre-med student, looked up from her biology textbook, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. In 1C, James Wilson, a 35-year-old corporate lawyer, set down his Wall Street Journal and began paying careful attention. In 3A, Elena Santos, a travel blogger with 1.2 million Instagram followers, discreetly angled her phone's camera toward the unfolding drama. The tension in the first-class cabin was becoming thick enough to cut with a knife. Bradford, emboldened by Carmen's support, stepped closer to Marcus's seat. Finally, someone with sense. I don't know how you got this ticket, probably stolen credit card fraudulent miles, some kind of scam, but this charade ends now. Fraudulent Marcus's voice remained calm, but something glacial entered his tone. Sir, I suggest you be very careful about making accusations you can't prove. I don't need to prove anything, Bradford shot back. Just look at you. Look at where you are. People like you don't fly first class legitimately. Everyone knows it. The racist implication was naked ugly, undeniable. Sarah Kim's textbook slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. James Wilson pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. Elena Santos tapped her Instagram stories camera, her finger hovering over the record button. Marcus looked directly at Carmen. Ma'am, are you going to allow a passenger to make racist accusations against another passenger? Carmen's eyes darted away from Marcus's steady gaze. She busied herself arranging napkins on a nearby service cart, her hands trembling slightly. Mr. Montgomery is a valued client, she said finally. You are delaying this flight and creating a disturbance. It was in that moment that Marcus realized logic would not win this argument. They had already decided who he was, what he was worth, where he belonged. They had made their judgments based on his hoodie, his age, his melanin. They wanted a show of power, a demonstration of hierarchy. He would give them exactly what they were asking for. Fine, Marcus said, standing slowly from seat 1A. At 6 feet 3 inches, he towered over both Carmen and Bradford, his athletic frame unfolding with fluid grace. For just a moment, both of them stepped back involuntarily, perhaps recognizing that they might have misjudged more than his financial status. But Marcus made no threatening moves. Instead, he reached up to the overhead compartment and retrieved a sleek leather duffel bag, slinging it over his shoulder with practiced ease. I'll get off, Marcus announced, his voice carrying clearly through the cabin. Every passenger in first class was watching now, some with phones discreetly positioned, others leaning forward in their seats. But I want everyone here to remember this moment. Remember every word that was spoken. Remember every assumption that was made. Carmen felt a flutter of unease at the strange calmness in his voice. Sir, if you just cooperate, this can all be forgotten. Marcus turned to look at her directly, and Carmen found herself taking another step backward. There was something in his eyes, not anger, not frustration, but a kind of quiet certainty that made her suddenly wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. Ma'am, Marcus said softly, this will never be forgotten. He turned and began walking toward the aircraft door, Bradford's voice following him with barely concealed triumph. About time someone restored order here. Maybe now we can have a civilized flight. As Marcus reached the jet bridge entrance, he paused and pulled out his phone. His thumb moved across the screen with deliberate precision, finding a contact labeled simply Simon, COO. Carmen watched from the galley, something cold settling in her stomach as she observed the young man's composure. Most passengers who were removed from flights left angry, embarrassed, defeated. This one looked like he was about to make the most important phone call of his life. Behind him, Bradford settled into seat 1A with obvious satisfaction, adjusting his silk tie and checking his expensive watch. Driver, he called to Carmen. I'll have a scotch when you get a chance. Single malt. The good stuff. Carmen nodded mechanically, but her attention remained fixed on the figure at the aircraft door. Marcus had the phone pressed to his ear now, and even from a distance she could see his lips moving in what appeared to be very specific, very detailed conversation. Jake Patterson, the 28-year-old flight attendant who had been watching the entire scene unfold from the forward galley, approached Carmen with obvious nervousness. Should we close the door and push back? He asked in a whisper. He's gone. The seat issue is resolved. Carmen's eyes never left Marcus's figure. Not yet, she said quietly. Something about this doesn't feel right. What do you mean I've been doing this job for 12 years, Jake? I've seen every type of passenger, every type of situation. The angry ones yell, the embarrassed ones argue, the defeated ones just leave. Carmen paused, watching as Marcus gestured slightly while speaking into his phone. But I've never seen someone get removed from a flight and then make a phone call with that kind of authority. Jake followed her gaze. He's probably calling a lawyer, or posting on social media about how unfairly he was treated. Maybe Carmen said, but doubt was creeping into her voice like cold water seeping through a crack. Or maybe we just made the biggest mistake of our careers. On the jet bridge, Marcus continued his phone conversation, his voice too low for anyone on the aircraft to hear. But if they could have listened, they would have heard words that would have made their blood run cold. Simon, it's me. I'm on flight 891. Yes, our airline. I need you to execute Protocol 7 immediately. Everyone involved needs to go. The captain, the lead flight attendant, the junior attendant, and the passenger who triggered this. Full corporate response. No exceptions. Marcus glanced back through the aircraft door one last time, his eyes meeting Carmen's across the distance. He gave her the slightest nod, not of forgiveness, but of acknowledgement. She had chosen her side. Now she would live with the consequences. The phone call continued for another minute, Marcus speaking in quiet, measured tones that conveyed absolute authority. Passengers near the windows began taking pictures of the unusual delay, sensing that something significant was happening, but not yet understanding what. Bradford Montgomery III sipped his scotch and smiled, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to engulf him. In his mind, he had won. Order had been restored. The natural hierarchy had been maintained. He had no idea that in approximately 4 minutes, his entire world was about to collapse. Marcus Rivera ended the call and slipped his phone back into the pocket of his Fear of God hoodie, but he didn't move from his position on the jet bridge. Instead, he stood with his back straight, his duffel bag slung casually over one shoulder, looking every inch like a man who was exactly where he belonged, even if where he belonged wasn't where others thought he should be. The truth was, Marcus Rivera had spent his entire life being underestimated. Born in East Los Angeles to a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep their tiny apartment, Marcus had learned early that the world would judge him by his zip code, his skin color, and the second-hand clothes he wore to school. But what the world couldn't see was the brilliant mind behind the quiet exterior, the coding skills he taught himself on library computers, or the relentless ambition that burned in his chest like a constant flame. At 12, while other kids his age were playing video games, Marcus was learning Python programming language from free online tutorials. At 16, he had already built and sold his first mobile app for $50,000 money he used to help his mother quit one of her jobs. At 19, still a sophomore at MIT on a full academic scholarship, he founded his first real company in his dorm room. That company, a logistics optimization platform, sold 18 months later for $50 million. By age 25, Marcus Rivera was worth his first billion. By 30, he owned a portfolio of 23 companies, spanning technology, logistics, real estate, and transportation. His personal net worth had climbed to $4.2 billion, making him one of the youngest African-American billionaires in history. But Marcus had learned something important during his rapid ascent through the ranks of global business money. Couldn't buy you respect from people who had already decided you didn't deserve it. Which brought him to 18 months ago and a decision that would lead directly to this moment on the jet bridge of Flight 891. Marcus had been in his corner office on the 47th floor of the Rivera Tech Holdings building in downtown L.A., reviewing quarterly reports when his assistant buzzed in with an unusual request. "Sir, there's a woman named Patricia Johnson on line 3. She says she needs to speak with you personally about discrimination she experienced on Atlantic Elite Airways. She found your direct number online and says it's urgent." Marcus had almost told his assistant to direct the call to their customer service team, Rivera Tech. Holdings had investments in dozens of companies, and customer complaints usually went through proper channels. But something made him pause. Put her through. Patricia Johnson's story was heartbreaking and familiar. A middle-aged African-American nurse from Detroit, she had saved for 2 years to fly first class to her daughter's wedding in California. Despite having a valid ticket, she had been repeatedly questioned by flight crew, asked to show additional identification, and finally moved to a middle seat in economy because a white passenger complained that she didn't look like she belonged in first class. "Mr. Rivera," Patricia had said, her voice shaking with emotion, "I know you're an important businessman. I know you probably can't do anything about this, but I just wanted someone to know what happened. I wanted someone to care." Marcus had cared. More than Patricia Johnson could have imagined. That afternoon, he tasked his best investigators with looking into Atlantic Elite Airways. What they found was disturbing. A pattern of discrimination complaints that were quietly settled. Minority passengers routinely upgraded down to accommodate white travelers, and a corporate culture that prioritized high-spending frequent flyers over basic human dignity. 3 weeks later, Marcus Rivera quietly purchased Atlantic Elite Airways. Not through Rivera Tech Holdings, which would have attracted media attention, but through a complex web of shell companies and offshore holdings that made the acquisition nearly impossible to trace. On paper, the airline was owned by Ocean Ventures Limited, a Bermuda-based investment firm. In reality, Marcus Rivera controlled 67% of Atlantic Elite Airways, making him the majority owner and effective CEO. The acquisition cost him $3.2 billion. He considered it the best money he had ever spent. For 18 months, Marcus had worked behind the scenes to understand the airline's culture review hiring practices and document incidents of discrimination. He had read every complaint, watched security footage, and quietly investigated dozens of cases where passengers had been mistreated based on their appearance, ethnicity, or perceived economic status. What he discovered was an unofficial but widespread policy of prioritizing certain passengers over others, a hierarchy based not on ticket price or airline status, but on subjective judgments about who belonged in premium cabins. Today's flight was supposed to be the final piece of his investigation. Marcus had deliberately booked first class under his own name, dressed casually, and planned to observe how he would be treated as an unknown passenger. He expected some bias, perhaps a few uncomfortable questions. He had not expected to be physically removed from an aircraft he owned, but as Marcus stood on that jet bridge phone call completed, a strange sense of calm settled over him. For 32 years he had been building toward this moment, not consciously, but inevitably. Every slight he had endured, every time he had been told he didn't belong somewhere, every assumption made about his worth based on his appearance, it had all led to this. Bradford Montgomery III, meanwhile, was living in a completely different reality. Born into fourth-generation Manhattan wealth, Bradford had never experienced a moment of doubt about his place in the world. The Montgomery family name was carved into the cornerstones of buildings throughout Manhattan's Upper East Side. Their real estate empire, built on discriminatory practices that dated back to the 1920s, was worth an estimated $2.8 billion. Bradford himself owned 47 buildings in New York City, each one a testament to the power of inherited privilege and preserved through what housing advocates called the most sophisticated discrimination operation in the city. 3 separate civil rights organizations were currently suing Montgomery properties for discriminatory rental practices, but Bradford viewed these legal challenges as mere business expenses. At 58, Bradford Montgomery III had never been told no by anyone who mattered. He had never waited in line, never been questioned about his right to be anywhere, never faced a moment of doubt about whether he deserved the best of everything simply by virtue of existing. His expectation of preferential treatment was as natural as breathing. When he flew, which he did twice monthly between New York and Miami to oversee his Florida properties, Bradford always sat in seat 1A, not because he had booked it necessarily, but because the airline staff knew who he was, knew his value as a customer, and made accommodations accordingly. In Bradford's world, young black men in hoodies didn't sit in first class. They certainly didn't remain seated when their betters required the space. The natural order of things demanded hierarchy, and Bradford viewed himself as naturally positioned at the top of that hierarchy. The confrontation with Marcus hadn't worried Bradford because, in his experience, these situations always resolved themselves in his favor. Money-talked status mattered, and the world operated according to rules that had been established long before he was born. What Bradford didn't know was that the world had changed around him, even if he hadn't noticed. Back on the aircraft, Carmen Rodriguez was experiencing the first real doubts of her 12-year career with Atlantic Elite Airways. She watched through the aircraft windows as Marcus continued his phone conversation on the jet bridge, and something about his posture, his calm demeanor, his obvious lack of distress, was setting off alarm bells in her mind. Carmen had grown up in Miami's Little Havana, the daughter of Cuban immigrants who had worked themselves to exhaustion to give their children better opportunities. She had taken the flight attendant job because it offered steady pay health benefits and the chance to travel. Over the years, she had prided herself on reading passengers correctly, understanding their needs, and providing excellent service to those who deserved it. But deserving it had somehow become coded language in her mind. High-spending passengers deserved better treatment. Frequent flyers deserved more attention. Diamond Elite members deserved to have their problems solved quickly and quietly. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped seeing passengers as people and started seeing them as categories, valuable, average, or expendable. The young man she had just helped remove Marcus didn't fit her usual categories. His boarding pass was legitimate. His behavior was respectful. His clothes, now that she thought about it more carefully, were expensive. The hoodie alone probably cost more than she made in a week. But he was black, he was young, and Bradford Montgomery was a Diamond Elite member who spent hundreds of thousands of dollars annually with the airline. The choice had seemed obvious. Now, watching Marcus on that jet bridge, Carmen was beginning to wonder if she had chosen wrong. Jake Patterson, the junior flight attendant, was having similar doubts, but for different reasons. At 28, Jake was relatively new to the airline industry, having been hired just 8 months earlier after graduating from a small college in Ohio with a hospitality management degree. Student loans totaling $127,000 had made the Atlantic Elite Airways job offer impossible to refuse, even though the pay was modest and the hours were brutal. Jake had grown up in a town that was 94% white, where diversity meant having 1 Asian family and 2 Hispanic families among the 3,400 residents. He considered himself free of prejudice. He had voted for Barack Obama. He watched black movies. He even listened to hip-hop music. But when confronted with the choice between supporting a young black passenger and pleasing a wealthy white customer, Jake had defaulted to what felt safe, keeping his job, avoiding conflict, and trusting that his more experienced colleague knew best. Now, as he watched the unusual scene unfolding on the jet bridge, Jake was beginning to realize that sometimes the safe choice and the right choice were not the same thing. Captain Michael O'Brien represented the old guard of the airline industry. At 52, with 25 years of flying experience and a spotless safety record, he commanded respect in cockpits around the world. His Irish Catholic upbringing in Boston had instilled in him a strong sense of hierarchy, order, and tradition. O'Brien believed in rules, procedures, and clear chains of command. When his flight attendant team reported a passenger disturbance, he trusted their judgment. When a Diamond Elite member expressed concerns about another passenger, O'Brien's instinct was to resolve the situation quickly and quietly. He had authorized Marcus's removal from the aircraft without personally investigating the situation, relying instead on his crew's assessment and his own assumptions about what kind of person belonged in first class. The decision would prove to be the final mistake of his aviation career. First Officer Lisa Martinez, at 34, represented the changing face of commercial aviation. A rising star in the industry, she had earned her captain's credentials and was scheduled to take command of her own aircraft within 6 months. Unlike her captain, Lisa had grown up in a diverse neighborhood in Phoenix, where her Mexican-American family had taught her to judge people by their actions, rather than their appearances. When the passenger disturbance was reported, Lisa had suggested that Captain O'Brien personally investigate before authorizing removal. Her suggestion had been dismissed with a wave of the hand and a reminder about proper chain of command. Now, as she watched the mysterious phone conversation taking place on the jet bridge, Lisa was wondering if her instincts had been correct and whether her failure to push harder for a proper investigation was about to cost everyone on the crew their careers. Sarah Kim, the pre-med student in Seat 2B, had started recording the confrontation on her phone after Bradford's comment about fraudulent credit cards. With 847,000 TikTok followers and a reputation for social justice content, Sarah recognized the moment as something significant. James Wilson, the corporate lawyer in Seat 1C, had been taking detailed notes throughout the encounter. His legal training had kicked in immediately when he heard Bradford's discriminatory language, and he was already mentally drafting the civil rights complaint that would inevitably follow. Elena Santos, the travel blogger in Seat 3A, had captured the entire confrontation on Instagram stories, broadcasting to her 1.2 million followers in real time. Her content typically focused on luxury travel and airline reviews. But this was something different, something important. None of these witnesses knew who Marcus Rivera was, but they all sensed that they were watching something significant unfold. The calm dignity with which he had handled the discrimination, the authority in his voice when he spoke to the flight crew, the deliberate phone call he was now making, all of it suggested that this story was far from over. On the jet bridge, Marcus ended his second phone call and began walking back toward the aircraft door. But instead of boarding, he stopped just outside the entrance and waited. Inside the cabin, Bradford Montgomery III was ordering his second scotch, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to engulf him. The stage was set, the players were in position, and Marcus Rivera was about to teach an entire industry what happened when you mistook quiet dignity for weakness. Bradford Montgomery III raised his crystal tumbler of single malt scotch and took a satisfied sip, savoring both the 18-year-old whiskey and his victory over the young man in the hoodie. From his throne in Seat 1, his rightful place, he surveyed the first-class cabin with the contentment of a king surveying his domain. Carmen he called to the lead flight attendant, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Outstanding work handling that situation. Firm, but professional. That's exactly the kind of service that keeps me loyal to Atlantic Elite. Carmen Rodriguez forced a smile as she approached with the bottle to refresh his drink, though something cold was settling in her stomach. Through the aircraft window, she could see Marcus still standing on the jet bridge phone pressed to his ear in what appeared to be an intense conversation. Mr. Montgomery, I do try to ensure all our premium passengers have the best possible experience, she replied, her voice carrying less confidence than usual. And that's why you people deserve recognition, Bradford said, settling back into the leather seat. The casual dehumanization in his phrase. You people hung in the air like smoke. You understand the natural order of things. Some passengers earn their way into first class through years of loyalty and substantial spending. Others, he gestured dismissively toward the aircraft door. Others try to game the system. Jake Patterson, who had been nervously organizing the galley service items, felt his stomach twist. Sir, his boarding pass was legitimate. I scanned it myself. Bradford's eyes narrowed as he turned his attention to the younger flight attendant. Son, I've been flying longer than you've been alive. Boarding passes can be forged, miles can be stolen, systems can be hacked. Just because something appears legitimate doesn't mean it is. But the passenger seemed respectful. Jake pressed his voice barely above a whisper. He wasn't causing any trouble. Wasn't causing trouble. Bradford's voice rose sharply. He was occupying a seat that belonged to a Diamond Elite member. He was disrupting the boarding process by refusing to move when politely asked. And frankly, Bradford leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried clearly through the cabin. Young men like that, dressed like that in a section like this. It makes the other passengers uncomfortable. Sarah Kim, listening from seat 2, B felt her jaw tighten. She discreetly angled her phone's camera toward Bradford, her finger hovering over the record button. At 22, as a Korean-American pre-med student at Harvard, she had experienced her share of discrimination, but she had never seen anything quite this blatant. What do you mean by young men like that? Jake asked, though he seemed to immediately regret the question. Bradford's smile was cold and calculating. Come now, son. We're all adults here. We all know what I mean. There's a certain demographic that tends to create problems on aircraft. Security concerns, behavioral issues, questionable backgrounds. It's simply a statistical reality. The racist implications were no longer implications. They were explicit accusations. James Wilson, the corporate lawyer in seat 1C, set down his Wall Street Journal and pulled out his phone. He began typing rapidly, documenting every word for what he already knew would become a significant legal case. Mr. Montgomery Carmen interrupted her voice. Strained. Perhaps we should keep the conversation focused on what Bradford cut her off. Customer service. Because that's exactly what this is about. I spend over $300,000 annually with this airline. I've been Diamond Elite for 15 consecutive years. I bring Atlantic Elite significant business through my real estate company's corporate travel account. He gestured around the first-class cabin with proprietary satisfaction. This section, this seat, this entire experience, it's designed for passengers like me. Passengers who've earned it through loyalty, through spending, through contributing to this airline's success. Bradford took another sip of scotch, the alcohol loosening his tongue further. What it's not designed for is random individuals who somehow acquire a ticket legitimately or otherwise. and think they can simply walk into spaces where they don't belong. Elena Santos, the travel blogger in seat 3A, was broadcasting the entire conversation live on Instagram stories. Her 1.2 million followers were watching in real time as one of the most blatant displays of airline discrimination in recent memory unfolded before their eyes. The comments on her live stream were exploding. Is this really happening in 2024? Someone record this? What airline? Is this boycott them? That man is disgusting. Captain Michael O'Brien emerged from the cockpit, drawn by the raised voices. At 52, with silver hair and the bearing of a military officer, he commanded immediate attention as he surveyed the scene. Is there still a problem here? O'Brien asked, his Irish accent, giving his voice a gravelly authority. No problem at all, Captain Bradford said smoothly, raising his glass in a mock toast. Your crew handled the situation perfectly. That young man has been removed, order has been restored, and we can proceed with a civilized flight. O'Brien nodded approvingly. Outstanding. Carmen Jake, excellent work maintaining cabin security and passenger comfort. But First Officer Lisa Martinez, who had followed the captain from the cockpit, was looking troubled. Captain, shouldn't we verify what actually happened? The removed passenger seemed calm and respectful from what I observed. O'Brien's expression hardened slightly. Officer Martinez, when dealing with passenger disturbances, we rely on our experienced cabin crew's assessment. Carmen has 12 years with this airline and an impeccable service record. But, sir, Lisa pressed, if the passenger had legitimate documentation. Documentation can be falsified, Bradford interjected smoothly. Captain, your first officer raises a fair point about due diligence, but sometimes experience trumps documentation. I've seen enough fraudulent tickets, stolen credit cards, and gaming of the system to recognize the signs. O'Brien found himself nodding along. Bradford Montgomery was known throughout the industry not just as a high-value passenger, but as someone with connections to Atlantic Elite's board of directors. His concerns carried weight. The situation has been resolved appropriately, O'Brien declared. We'll proceed with departure. Through the aircraft windows, passengers could see Marcus still on the jet bridge. But now he was joined by two men in business suits who appeared to be airline employees. The conversation looked intense, with Marcus gesturing toward the aircraft while the suited men took notes on tablets. Carmen felt her unease growing. Captain, the removed passenger is still on the jet bridge. Usually, security escorts them away from the gate immediately. O'Brien glanced through the window, frowning slightly. Probably filing a complaint with customer service. Standard procedure. It'll be handled through proper channels. But Jake Patterson was staring out the window with growing alarm. Captain, one of those men just showed the passenger some kind of identification. And the passenger... He's walking back toward the aircraft door. A hush fell over the first-class cabin. Bradford set down his Scotch glass, his confident demeanor wavering for the first time. What's he coming back for? He was removed. Security should prevent him from... Ladies and gentlemen, a voice announced over the aircraft's intercom system, clear and authoritative. This is the cockpit speaking. We're experiencing a brief delay while we address a documentation issue. Please remain seated while we resolve this matter. But the voice wasn't Captain O'Brien's Irish brogue or First Officer Martinez's southwestern accent. The voice belonged to someone else entirely. Someone who spoke with the calm authority of absolute power. Bradford's face went pale. Who was that? That wasn't the captain. O'Brien was already moving toward the cockpit, his face confused and angry. No one is authorized to make announcements on my aircraft without my permission. But as he reached the cockpit door, it opened from the inside. Marcus Rivera stepped out wearing a captain's uniform jacket over his hoodie, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Good afternoon, Captain O'Brien, Marcus said pleasantly. I believe we need to have a conversation. The first-class cabin fell into stunned silence. Bradford's Scotch glass slipped from his fingers, amber liquid spreading across the white tablecloth. Carmen felt her knees go weak. Jake Patterson grabbed the nearest seat back for support. "What? How did you—" O'Brien stammered, his usual command presence completely shattered. "How did I get back on the aircraft?" Marcus asked conversationally. "How did I access the cockpit? How did I make an announcement on your intercom system?" His smile widened slightly. "Those are excellent questions, Captain." "Would you like me to answer them?" Sarah Kim's TikTok live stream, which had maintained a steady audience of about 15,000 viewers, suddenly exploded to over 80,000 as word spread across social media that something unprecedented was happening on Flight 891. The comments were flying. "Oh my God. Plot twist. He's back. What is happening? This is better than Netflix." Marcus walked slowly down the aisle, his presence commanding absolute attention from every passenger and crew member. When he reached seat 1A, he looked down at Bradford Montgomery III with something that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite pity. Mr. Montgomery Marcus said quietly, "I believe you're in my seat." Bradford's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Your seat. But you were removed." "I was temporarily inconvenienced," Marcus corrected gently. "But now I'm back and we need to discuss a few things. All of us." He turned to address the entire first-class section, his voice carrying clearly through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Marcus Rivera. Some of you witnessed a rather unpleasant situation about 10 minutes ago, where I was removed from this aircraft based on assumptions about who I am and whether I belonged here." Carmen Rodriguez felt the world tilting beneath her feet. Something about the way Marcus carried himself, the authority in his voice, the calm certainty of his movements, it was all wrong. Passengers who were humiliated and removed from flights didn't come back wearing captain's jackets. They didn't access restricted areas. They didn't command aircraft intercom systems. Those assumptions, Marcus continued, were based on my appearance, my age, my ethnicity, and Mr. Montgomery's belief that people who look like me don't legitimately belong in first-class cabins. Bradford found his voice, though it cracked slightly. "Now see here, you can't just... You don't have the authority to... This is highly irregular." Marcus pulled his phone from his hoodie pocket and held it up so everyone could see the screen. "Mr. Montgomery, would you like to know who does have the authority?" The phone displayed what appeared to be an official company directory. At the top of the screen, in clear letters, were the words, "Atlantic Elite Airways. Executive Leadership." Below that, a photo and bio Marcus Rivera, Chief Executive Officer and majority shareholder. Education, MIT Computer Science, Harvard, MBA. Net worth, $4.2 billion. Company holdings, 67% of Atlantic Elite Airways through Ocean Ventures Limited. The silence in the cabin was deafening. Bradford stared at the phone screen, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and growing horror. That's impossible. The CEO of Atlantic Elite is... "Is what?" Mr. Montgomery Marcus asked softly. "White older, named something more." "Familiar to you." Captain O'Brien was the first to find his voice. "Sir, if this is legitimate, then we need to..." "There's been a serious misunderstanding." "Has there been a misunderstanding?" Captain Marcus asked, turning his attention to the older man. "Let me ask you this. Did you personally investigate the passenger complaint before authorizing my removal?" O'Brien's face went red. My crew reported a passenger disturbance. I trusted their professional judgment." "Your crew reported that a Diamond Elite passenger was uncomfortable with another passenger's presence," Marcus corrected. Did you verify the legitimacy of either passenger's tickets? Did you review the seating manifest? Did you ask any questions about the nature of the complaint? The captain's silence was answer enough. Marcus turned his attention back to Bradford. Mr. Montgomery, you made several interesting claims about my character, my background, and my right to be here. You suggested my ticket was fraudulent, my credit card was stolen, and my presence made other passengers uncomfortable. Bradford was sinking lower in seat 1A as if he could disappear entirely. There was a misunderstanding. I didn't know. You didn't know what Marcus pressed, that I was the CEO. Would that have changed how you treated me? No. So you're saying that if I had been just a regular passenger, a teacher, a nurse, an accountant, your behavior would have been acceptable? Bradford's mouth worked soundlessly. Marcus pulled out his phone again, this time opening what appeared to be a recording app. Mr. Montgomery, for the record, and for the benefit of the federal investigation that will inevitably follow this incident, could you repeat what you told the flight crew about why I didn't belong in first class? I refuse to. This is entrapment. It's not entrapment when 73 passengers and 4 crew members witnessed your statements, Marcus replied calmly. It's documentation. He turned to address the cabin again. Ladies and gentlemen, what you witnessed today wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of discrimination that has infected this airline for years. Passengers have been moved, questioned, and humiliated, based on nothing more than assumptions about their appearance and their right to be treated with dignity. Carmen Rodriguez felt tears stinging her eyes as the full weight of the situation crashed down on her. She had been a flight attendant for 12 years. She had prided herself on her professionalism, her service record, her ability to handle difficult situations, and she had just participated in discriminating against her own boss. Marcus seemed to read her thoughts. Carmen Jake. Captain O'Brien, you made choices today. You chose to believe assumptions over evidence. You chose status over fairness. You chose to participate in discrimination rather than prevent it. His voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. Those choices have consequences. Not just for you, but for every passenger who flies with this airline. For every person who has been made to feel like they don't belong somewhere they have every right to be. Jake Patterson stepped forward, his face pale and tears in his eyes. Mr. Rivera, sir, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I should have stood up for you. I should have verified the facts instead of just going along with... With what? Jake Marcus asked gently. With discrimination. Jake finished quietly. I participated in discrimination, and I'm ashamed of myself. Marcus nodded slowly. That's the first step toward making sure this never happens again. He pulled out his phone one final time, speed dialing a number. Simon, it's done. Execute the full protocol. Yes, everyone involved. And Simon, make sure the media statement is ready. Full transparency, no cover-ups, no quiet settlements. We're going to use this moment to change how this industry operates. As Marcus ended the call, Bradford Montgomery III finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. What's going to happen to us? Marcus looked down at the man who 15 minutes earlier had been so confident in his superiority, so certain of his right to determine who belonged where. Mr. Montgomery Marcus said quietly, You're about to learn that actions have consequences. And sometimes those consequences are delivered by people you never saw coming. The aircraft doors sealed shut, but not for departure. They sealed shut to contain the reckoning that was about to unfold at 30,000 feet. Sarah Kim's hands were trembling as she held her phone, but her voice remained steady as she addressed her rapidly growing TikTok audience. The viewer count had exploded from 15,000 to over 180,000 in just the past 5 minutes, with new viewers joining every second as word spread across social media platforms. "Guys, I cannot believe what I'm witnessing right now," Sarah whispered into her phone's camera, trying to keep her voice low while ensuring her 847,000 followers could hear every word. The man who was just discriminated against and removed from this flight. He's the actual CEO of the airline. The CEO of the airline. The comments section on her live stream was moving so fast it was nearly impossible to read individual messages, but the overwhelming sentiment was clear. No way this is real. Best plot twist ever. That racist guy is so screwed recording everything. Please share this everywhere. Sarah adjusted her angle to capture Marcus Rivera as he stood in the aisle, his presence somehow filling the entire first-class cabin despite his casual attire. The contrast was surreal. A billionaire CEO in a hoodie delivering what appeared to be the most consequential moment in aviation discrimination history. The way this man is handling this situation. Sarah continued her commentary. The dignity, the calm authority. This is exactly how you expose discrimination. You don't get angry. You don't get loud. You get strategic. Meanwhile, in seat 1C, James Wilson was operating with the precision of the experienced corporate lawyer he was. His Twitter thread, which had started as a simple documentation of the discrimination he was witnessing, had exploded into the fastest-growing viral thread in his account's history. His latest tweet read, "Thread update, August 23rd. The man who was discriminated against just revealed he owns the airline. I repeat, the victim of discrimination owns the company. This is the most incredible reversal I've ever witnessed. Hashtag Atlantic Elite Owner. Hashtag Justice Served." The retweet numbers were climbing at an unprecedented rate. 2:47 p.m., 12,000 retweets. 2:49 p.m., 28,000 retweets. 2:51 p.m., 67,000 retweets. 2:53 p.m., 134,000 retweets. James was methodically documenting every word, every reaction, building what he knew would become the definitive legal record of the incident. His legal training had kicked into overdrive. This wasn't just viral content. This was evidence in what would inevitably become a landmark discrimination case. The defendant, Bradford Montgomery III, has just been informed that his victim is actually the CEO of the airline, James typed rapidly. His reaction stunned silence and visible terror. The crew members who participated are realizing their careers are over. This is justice in real time. Elena Santos, the travel blogger with 1.2 million Instagram followers, was managing multiple platforms simultaneously. Her Instagram stories were being screenshotted and reshared at viral velocity, while her Facebook live stream had attracted over 250,000 viewers, more than any content she had ever created. This is Elena Santos, reporting live from what I believe will go down as the most significant moment in airline discrimination history. She spoke quietly into her phone while filming the scene. For those just joining, we witnessed a black passenger being removed from first class to accommodate a white passenger who demanded his seat. That removed passenger has just revealed himself to be the airline's owner and CEO. The responses to her content were overwhelming her notification system, from verified accounts at The Real Mike B, 8.2 million followers. This is exactly why we can't stay silent about discrimination. Share this story everywhere. At Justice Warrior, 4.7 million followers. When they go low, we go high and own the company. This man is my hero at Travel Blogger Pro 2. 3M followers. I'm immediately canceling my Atlantic Elite partnership after seeing this blatant discrimination. From regular users, O-M-G. I'm crying. This is so satisfying. That racist man's face when he realized O-M-G. G. G. This man handled this like a boss plot twist of the century. But the social media explosion was extending far beyond the three primary witnesses. Other passengers throughout the aircraft were documenting the unprecedented scene. In seat 2, C. Maria Gonzalez, a 34-year-old teacher from Miami, was broadcasting on Facebook Live to her local community. Her stream, typically limited to a few dozen viewers, had attracted over 15,000 viewers as Miami residents shared the story of discrimination happening at their own airport. "Esto es increíble," Maria whispered in Spanish before switching to English. "This is unbelievable. I teach my students about standing up to discrimination, but I'm watching a masterclass in how to do it with dignity and power." Dr. Robert Kim in seat 1D was taking detailed written notes, while simultaneously texting updates to his wife, who was sharing the story in several Korean-American community groups. The story was spreading through Asian American networks as people recognized the broader implications of appearance-based discrimination. The way this CEO is handling the situation, Dr. Kim wrote in a text that would be screenshot and shared hundreds of times, shows that real power isn't about getting loud or getting angry. It's about staying calm and letting your actions speak. This man is teaching a masterclass in dignity under pressure. Jennifer Walsh, the attorney in seat 3B, was recording audio on her phone while taking written notes, preparing for what she already knew would become a significant legal case. Her legal mind was processing not just the discrimination itself, but the airline's potential liability, the federal civil rights violations, and the precedent this case would set. Ahmed Hassan, the engineer in seat 4. A was streaming on multiple platforms simultaneously. Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn reaching different communities with the same powerful message. As a Middle Eastern American who had experienced his share of airline discrimination, he recognized the historical significance of what was unfolding. The viral momentum was building beyond individual platforms. TikTok. The hashtag Atlantic Elite Discrimination had generated over 200,000 videos in just 20 minutes as users shared reactions, commentary, and calls for action. Twitter. Multiple hashtags were trending simultaneously. Hashtag Atlantic Elite Owner. 487,000 tweets. Hashtag Bradford Montgomery. 329,000 tweets. Hashtag Airline Discrimination. 234,000 tweets. Hashtag Marcus Rivera. 156,000 tweets. Instagram stories featuring the incident had been viewed over 15 million times, with major influencers and celebrities sharing Elena's original content. Reddit. The story had reached the front page of r/justice-served/public freakout and r/pro-revenge simultaneously, with over 100,000 upvotes and thousands of awards. YouTube news channels and content creators were rushing to produce emergency videos, with some already uploading preliminary coverage within 30 minutes of the incident. The speed at which the story was spreading was unprecedented. Traditional media outlets were struggling to keep up with the social media firestorm. CNN's social media desk flagged the story within 25 minutes, with producers scrambling to verify the details and book interviews. Fox News assigned a breaking news team to cover the developing story, though their approach would focus on the business implications rather than the discrimination angle. MSNBC was already planning a prime-time segment on airline discrimination, using the Marcus Rivera incident as a case study in how power dynamics can unexpectedly shift. Local Miami news stations were dispatching crews to the airport, hoping to catch interviews with passengers as they deplaned. But it was the international pickup that truly demonstrated the story's global resonance. BBC International was monitoring the viral spread, recognizing it as a uniquely American story with universal themes of dignity and justice. Reuters had distributed a preliminary wire story to member outlets worldwide with the headline, "Billionaire CEO Reveals Identity After Being Discriminated Against on Own Airline." Canadian Broadcasting Corporation was preparing a segment on discrimination in travel using the Atlantic Elite incident as a contemporary example. Australian media outlets were sharing the story as an example of how social media could drive real-time accountability. Back on the aircraft, Marcus Rivera was acutely aware of the documentation happening around him. He could see phones recording here the quiet commentary of live streams and notice the frantic typing of social media updates. Rather than being bothered by the attention, he seemed to welcome it. "I want everyone to see this," Marcus announced to the cabin, his voice carrying clearly to every recording device. "I want this moment documented because it represents something larger than just one incident on one flight." He gestured toward Bradford, who was still slumped in seat 1. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. "What you witnessed here today, the automatic assumptions, the casual racism, the abuse of power, this happens to people every single day. The only difference is that today it happened to someone who could do something about it immediately." Sarah Kim captured this moment perfectly, her TikTok audience now approaching 300,000 live viewers. Do you hear that she whispered to her camera? This man isn't just seeking personal justice. He's using his position to highlight a bigger problem. This is how you use privilege and power responsibly. The comment flood on her stream was overwhelming. He's using his moment to help others. That's real leadership. This man for president. Crying happy tears ran. James Wilson was documenting the broader implications in real time. This incident is becoming more than viral content. It's becoming a catalyst for industry-wide change. When a billionaire CEO personally experiences discrimination and then uses that experience to expose broader patterns of bias, it creates unprecedented opportunity for real reform. His tweet was retweeted by civil rights organizations, legal experts, and social justice advocates, each adding their own commentary about the significance of the moment. Elena Santos was capturing the international interest. "I'm getting messages from followers in 23 countries asking for updates." This story is resonating globally because discrimination in travel is a universal experience. When someone with power finally experiences it themselves and takes action, it gives hope to everyone who has been mistreated. The social media documentation was creating a real-time archive of a historical moment, the moment when a victim of discrimination revealed themselves to be in a position to create immediate, meaningful change. The viral spread wasn't just about entertainment. It was about hope, justice, and the possibility that systems could be changed from within. Marcus Rivera understood this completely. As he stood in that first-class aisle, surrounded by cameras and live streams, he wasn't just addressing the passengers on Flight 891. He was speaking to millions of people around the world who had experienced similar discrimination, but never had the power to fight back effectively. The documentation would prove crucial not just for entertainment value, but as evidence in the federal investigation that would inevitably follow, and as inspiration for the industry-wide changes that Marcus was already planning to implement. The viral moment was becoming a movement, and everyone with a phone was helping to document the birth of a new standard for how discrimination should be confronted and resolved. Marcus Rivera stood in the center of the first-class aisle, his presence somehow making the spacious cabin feel small and intimate. The contrast was striking. A man in a casual hoodie, commanding the attention of every person on the aircraft, with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions. Before we proceed, Marcus announced, his voice carrying easily through the cabin, "I want to make a phone call that I think everyone should hear." He pulled out his phone and activated the speaker function, the dial tone audible throughout the first-class section. The number he called rang twice before a professional voice answered. Simon Rodriguez speaking, Atlantic Elite Airways Operations Center. Simon, this is Marcus Rivera. I'm currently standing on Flight 891, which was supposed to depart Miami for JFK approximately 23 minutes ago. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Simon responded, his voice carried immediate concern and absolute deference. Mr. Rivera, sir, I wasn't aware you were traveling today. Is there a problem with the flight? Do you need immediate assistance? Bradford Montgomery III, still slumped in seat 1. I felt what little color remained in his face drain away completely. The casual familiarity with which the airline's chief operating officer addressed the man in the hoodie made the reality undeniable. This was really happening. Simon, I need you to execute Protocol 7 immediately. Marcus continued, his tone remaining conversational despite the weight of his words. Full documentation, complete staff replacement, and federal notification. So Protocol 7 is... Are you certain that's complete termination of all involved personnel and federal civil rights investigation? I'm standing in an aircraft where I was physically removed from a seat I purchased based solely on racial discrimination. The incident was witnessed by 73 passengers and documented on multiple social media platforms, currently being viewed by hundreds of thousands of people worldwide. Simon's voice became crisp and professional. Understood, sir. Initiating Protocol 7 immediately. I'll need the personnel identification numbers for all staff involved. Marcus looked directly at Carmen Rodriguez as he spoke. Lead flight attendant, Carmen Rodriguez, employee number 12,947. Flight attendant, Jake Patterson, employee number 18293. Captain Michael O'Brien, pilot, certification number 7842. Ground security contractor Tony Russo, badge number SR 4471. Carmen felt her knees buckle as she heard her employee number recited with perfect accuracy. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Not only was this man the CEO of the airline, but he had her personnel information memorized. He had clearly been planning this investigation for some time. Jake Patterson grabbed the nearest seat back for support, his face gone completely white. Mr. Rivera, please, I have student loans. I need this job, Jake Marcus said quietly. You had a choice between following illegal orders and doing the right thing. The consequences of that choice were always going to be yours to bear. Captain O'Brien stepped forward, his military bearing intact despite the circumstances. Sir, if you are indeed the CEO of this airline, then this is a conversation that should happen through proper corporate channels, not in front of passengers. Marcus turned his full attention to the captain, and something in his expression made O'Brien take an involuntary step backward. Captain, you authorized the removal of a passenger from this aircraft without personally investigating the complaint. You trusted the word of a discriminatory passenger over the rights of someone who had committed no violation of any kind. You failed in your duty as captain, and you failed as a human being. I followed standard protocol. Show me the protocol that says to remove paying passengers based on the complaints of other passengers about their appearance, Marcus interrupted. Show me the policy that prioritizes racist passengers over civil rights. O'Brien opened his mouth, but no words came. There was no such protocol because discrimination wasn't policy. It was practice, unwritten and unofficial, but widespread and damaging. Marcus turned his attention to Bradford, who seemed to be trying to sink completely into the leather seat. Mr. Montgomery, you've been unusually quiet. Just 25 minutes ago, you had quite a lot to say about my character, my background, and my right to be here. Bradford's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Has there? Marcus asked. Let me read you some quotes from the past half hour, all documented on multiple video recordings that are currently being viewed by over 400,000 people on social media. He pulled out his phone and began scrolling through what appeared to be notes. Quote, "This section isn't for people like you, boy." Quote, "You probably used food stamps to get here." Quote, "You probably stole that credit card anyway." Quote, "People like you don't fly first class legitimately." With each quote, Bradford seemed to shrink further into his seat. The casual cruelty of his words when repeated back to him sounded even more damning than they had in the moment. "Mr. Montgomery, was there a misunderstanding, or were those your actual beliefs about me based on my appearance? I didn't know who you were. So your behavior would have been acceptable if I had been a teacher, a nurse, an accountant," Marcus pressed. "Are you saying discrimination is acceptable as long as the victim doesn't have the power to fight back?" Bradford's mouth worked soundlessly. Marcus returned to his phone call with Simon. "Simon, please also execute a permanent travel ban for passenger Bradford Montgomery III across all Atlantic Elite flights and partner airlines. Customer number Diamond-4471. Sir, that's a lifetime ban from over 30 airlines across 4 continents. Are you certain, Mr.? Montgomery has demonstrated that he believes first-class accommodations should be distributed based on racial hierarchy rather than payment and basic human dignity. He is no longer welcome on any aircraft in our network." Bradford finally found his voice, though it cracked with desperation. "You can't do this. I spend hundreds of thousands of dollars with this airline. I know people I'll call your board of directors." Marcus smiled for the first time since returning to the aircraft. "Mr. Montgomery, I am the board of directors. I own 67% of this company. The remaining 33% is held by investment firms who defer to my judgment on all operational matters." He gestured around the first-class cabin. "This aircraft, the seats you're sitting in, the crew members you demanded accommodate you. The routes we fly, the policies we follow, it all belongs to me. And you just spent the better part of an hour demonstrating why you're not welcome on my property." Sarah Kim was capturing every moment on TikTok, her audience now approaching 500,000 live viewers. The comments were moving too fast to read, but the overwhelming sentiment was celebration of justice being served in real time. "This is the most satisfying thing I've ever witnessed," Sarah whispered to her camera. Watching a racist passenger realize he just discriminated against the actual owner of the airline is better than any movie. James Wilson was documenting the legal implications on Twitter. "This is unprecedented. We're watching the victim of discrimination reveal himself as the person with ultimate authority to create immediate consequences. Every law student will study this case." Elena Santos was broadcasting to her global audience. The international implications of this are huge. When a billionaire CEO personally experiences discrimination, it validates what millions of travelers of color experience regularly. This could change the entire industry. Marcus addressed Simon on the phone again. "Simon, I want the termination letter sent to personal email addresses within the next 5 minutes. Full cause termination, 0 severance, with notation that termination was for violation of federal civil rights laws." "Yes, sir." Legal has already prepared the templates for Protocol 7 situations. Letters will be sent immediately, and Simon, prepare a press release for immediate distribution. Full transparency. No legal hedging, no corporate speak. The public deserves to know exactly what happened here and exactly how we're responding. Sir, legal counsel typically recommends more cautious language in discrimination cases. Simon, I don't want cautious language. I want the truth, and I want it clear that this airline will never tolerate discrimination against any passenger regardless of their appearance, ethnicity, or perceived economic status. As Marcus ended the call, his phone immediately began buzzing with notifications. Within minutes of the call, the termination emails had been sent and 4 careers in aviation had ended. Carmen Rodriguez's phone buzzed first. The email was brief and devastating. Atlantic Elite Airways employment termination, Notice, employee Carmen Rodriguez, number 12947. Reason violation of federal civil rights laws. Customer discrimination. Effective immediately. Severance, $0. Cause termination benefits. Termination. Immediate note. This termination has been reported to aviation industry databases and may affect future employment opportunities. Carmen began crying as she read the email. 12 years of her career gone in an instant because she had chosen to prioritize a wealthy passenger's comfort over basic human dignity. Jake Patterson's termination notice arrived 30 seconds later. His hands shook as he read the same devastating language, knowing that his $127,000 in student loans had just become infinitely harder to pay back. Captain O'Brien's notification was different. His pilot certification was under federal review, which meant his 25-year career in aviation was effectively over, regardless of any airline employment. Bradford's phone buzzing indicated that his lifetime ban had been entered into the airline industry's shared database, making him effectively unable to fly on dozens of airlines worldwide. Marcus watched as each person processed the immediate consequences of their choices. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made everyone in the cabin understand they were witnessing a historical moment. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus addressed the entire first-class section. What happened here today wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of discrimination that has infected this industry for decades. Passengers of color. Passengers who don't meet certain socioeconomic assumptions. Passengers who are judged by their appearance rather than their humanity, they face this treatment regularly. He gestured toward Bradford. The difference is that today it happened to someone who could do something about it immediately and definitively. Marcus pulled out his phone one final time. I want to show you something that will put this in perspective. He opened what appeared to be a database of complaints. In the past 18 months, Atlantic Elite Airways has received 247 discrimination complaints. Of those, 238 involved passengers of color being questioned, moved or removed from flights to accommodate white passengers who complained about their presence. The numbers hung in the air like an indictment. 96% of those complaints were resolved with travel vouchers and non-disclosure agreements. The discrimination was covered up, not corrected. Marcus looked directly at each crew member in turn. You weren't just following policy today. You were perpetuating a culture of discrimination that this airline has allowed to exist because it was profitable to prioritize certain passengers over others. He turned to Bradford one final time. Mr. Montgomery, your behavior today was the culmination of decades of believing that your money, your status, and your skin color gave you the right to determine who belonged where. You were wrong. Bradford's voice was barely audible. What's going to happen to me? Marcus considered the question carefully. You're going to experience what it feels like to be excluded, to be told you don't belong, to have your access to services denied based on arbitrary judgments about your character. The difference is your exclusion is based on your actions, not your appearance. As if on cue, every phone in the first-class cabin began buzzing simultaneously. The story had officially broken into mainstream media. CNN breaking news billionaire CEO reveals identity after being discriminated against on his own. Airline Fox News alert. Atlantic Elite Airways. CEO fires. Entire flight crew after discrimination incident. MSNBC. Viral video. Shows real-time justice as discrimination. Victim reveals he owns the company. The story was spreading at viral velocity, but now it had the credibility and reach of major news networks behind it. Marcus surveyed the cabin one final time, taking in the stunned passengers, the devastated crew members, and the man who had started it all with his casual bigotry. The flight to New York will proceed with a replacement crew, Marcus announced. Mr. Montgomery, you will not be on that flight. Security will escort you back to the terminal where you can make other arrangements for travel. I suggest you consider ground transportation as your options in the air have become significantly limited." As if summoned, 3 airport security officers appeared at the aircraft door. They moved with professional efficiency, escorting Bradford from the aircraft while he mumbled incoherent protests about lawyers and lawsuits. The remaining passengers watched in stunned silence as the man who had been so confident in his superiority 20 minutes earlier was led away like a common criminal. Marcus Rivera, CEO and owner of Atlantic Elite Airways, finally took his seat in 1A. The seat he had paid for the seat he had been denied, the seat that was rightfully his all along. As he settled into the leather, Marcus looked around the cabin at the passengers who had witnessed history unfold. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience during this unusual situation. I hope what you've seen today demonstrates that discrimination will not be tolerated regardless of who commits it or who experiences it." The aircraft doors closed and Flight 891 finally prepared for departure. But everyone aboard knew they had just witnessed something far more significant than a delayed flight. They had watched justice served in real time, and they had seen what happened when quiet dignity met absolute power. The reversal was complete. The morning news cycle exploded with unprecedented coverage as the Atlantic Elite Airways incident dominated headlines across every major network and social media platform. Within 6 hours of the confrontation on Flight 891, the story had generated more engagement than any discrimination case in aviation history. At Atlantic Elite Airways headquarters in Miami, Chief Operating Officer Simon Rodriguez was orchestrating the most comprehensive crisis response in the airline's 40-year history. The conference room on the 34th floor buzzed with activity as legal teams, public relations specialists, and executive staff worked to manage the fallout from what was already being called the Rivera Revelation. "Stock trading has been halted twice in the past 4 hours," announced Chief Financial Officer Diana Chen, reviewing real-time market data on her tablet. "We're seeing unprecedented volatility, but the sentiment is overwhelmingly positive. Investors are rallying behind Marcus's leadership and the company's zero-tolerance response." Atlantic Elite Airways, stock trading under the symbol AAFC, had opened the morning at $287.43. By noon, it had spiked to $314.67, representing a 26% increase in value. The surge was driven by investors' confidence in the company's decisive handling of the discrimination incident and the recognition that Marcus Rivera's leadership represented a new standard of corporate accountability. "Social media engagement is off the charts," reported social media director Jennifer Walsh, scrolling through analytics dashboards. The hashtag Atlantic Elite Justice has generated over 2.3 million posts. Customer satisfaction sentiment has jumped from 73% to 94% positive overnight. "We're getting thousands of messages from travelers expressing support for the company's actions." But the immediate consequences extended far beyond positive stock movement and social media engagement. Within the airline industry, the Rivera incident was triggering a cascade of policy changes and self-examination that executives had been avoiding for decades. At competitor airlines across the country, emergency board meetings were being convened to review discrimination policies and training protocols. Delta Airlines announced within 8 hours that it was implementing immediate bias training for all customer-facing staff. United Airlines committed to establishing an independent discrimination review board with external oversight. Southwest Airlines pledged to increase diversity in management positions by 40% within 18 months. The Rivera Standard is becoming the new industry benchmark, noted aviation industry analyst Robert Martinez during his appearance on CNN. When a billionaire CEO personally experiences discrimination and responds with immediate transparent consequences, it forces every other airline to examine their own practices. The individual consequences for those involved in the discrimination were swift and severe. Carmen Rodriguez sat in her small apartment in Coral Gables, staring at her laptop screen as she processed the reality of her situation. The termination email from Atlantic Elite Airways had been followed by automated notifications from aviation industry databases, effectively blacklisting her from employment with any major airline. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, legal representatives, and former colleagues expressing everything from sympathy to condemnation. The unanimous message was clear. Her 12-year career in aviation was over. "I keep replaying it in my head," Carmen told her sister during a tearful phone conversation that evening. "I saw his boarding pass. It was legitimate, but I chose to believe Mr. Montgomery instead of trusting the evidence in front of me. I participated in discrimination against my own boss, against a human being who deserved better." Carmen's financial situation was dire. As a single mother of 2 teenagers, she relied on her airline salary to support her family and care for her elderly parents. The cause termination meant no severance pay, no continuation of health benefits, and no positive references for future employment. But in the days following her termination, something unexpected happened. Carmen began receiving messages from civil rights organizations offering support counseling services and assistance in finding new employment outside the aviation industry. Her public acknowledgement of wrongdoing and apparent genuine remorse had generated sympathy from some quarters, even as it had ended her aviation career. Jake Patterson's situation was even more precarious. At 28, with $127,000 in student loan debt and no family financial support, the loss of his airline position threatened his financial survival. His modest apartment in Fort Lauderdale suddenly seemed unaffordable, and his student loan payments loomed like an insurmountable mountain. Jake had spent the evening after his termination writing and rewriting a public apology, trying to find words that could adequately express his remorse for participating in discrimination. The statement he finally posted on social media was raw and honest. "I failed as a flight attendant and as a human being. I allowed bias and fear to override my moral compass. I participated in discriminating against a passenger who deserved respect and dignity, and I've lost my job as a direct result of that choice. I deserve to be fired. I hope other people in my position will learn from my mistake and choose courage over compliance when faced with discrimination." Jake's apology was shared over 80,000 times, generating both criticism and unexpected support. Several employment services reached out to offer career counseling and job placement assistance, recognizing his apparent genuine commitment to learning from his mistake. Captain Michael O'Brien's downfall was the most dramatic. With 25 years of flying experience and an impeccable safety record, O'Brien had been just 3 years from a comfortable retirement with full pension benefits. The federal investigation into his role in the discrimination incident had resulted in the immediate suspension of his pilot certification, effectively ending his career. The pilot certification review process was thorough and unforgiving. Federal investigators found that O'Brien had authorized the removal of a passenger without conducting any personal investigation, had failed to review documentation, and had prioritized passenger complaints over federal civil rights protections. Captain O'Brien's actions represent a failure of judgment that undermines the authority and responsibility inherent in aircraft command. Read the Federal Aviation Administration's preliminary report. Commercial aviation requires leaders who can make decisions based on evidence and regulation, not assumptions and bias. O'Brien's pension accumulated over decades of service was now under legal review. His reputation in the aviation industry was destroyed. At 52, he faced the prospect of starting over in a new career with limited transferable skills and a federal discrimination finding on his record. Bradford Montgomery. The third's consequences extended far beyond the airline industry. Within 24 hours of the viral incident, Bradford's real estate empire began experiencing immediate financial pressure. 3 major corporate clients canceled property management contracts, citing reputational concerns and incompatibility with company values. two luxury retailers canceled lease agreements for high-end Manhattan properties, specifically referencing the Atlantic Elite incident in their termination letters. The New York City Commission on Human Rights announced that it was reviewing all housing discrimination complaints filed against Montgomery properties in the past 5 years, with particular attention to patterns of racial bias in rental approvals and tenant treatment. Bradford's social consequences were equally severe. The Manhattan Country Club, where he had been a member for 27 years, quietly asked for his resignation. The exclusive charity boards where he had served as a prominent donor began distancing themselves from his involvement. His usual table at high-end Manhattan restaurants was suddenly unavailable when he called for reservations. Most significantly, Bradford's own legal troubles were expanding. The viral video evidence of his explicit racist statements on Flight 891 was being entered as evidence in 3 separate housing discrimination lawsuits against Montgomery properties. Civil rights attorneys argued that his recorded statements demonstrated a pattern of racial bias that supported their clients' claims of discriminatory treatment. Mr. Montgomery's own words, captured on video and witnessed by dozens of people, provide clear evidence of his discriminatory mindset, explained civil rights attorney Maria Santos during a press conference. This evidence significantly strengthens the cases of tenants who have experienced similar treatment from Montgomery properties. The immediate consequences rippled through the airline industry in unexpected ways. Flight attendant unions across the country issued statements supporting the terminations, while also calling for better training and clearer policies to prevent similar incidents. The Association of Flight Attendants released a comprehensive statement acknowledging that discrimination in aviation was a widespread problem requiring broad solutions. The actions of the Atlantic Elite crew were inexcusable, the union statement read. However, this incident highlights the need for industry-wide changes in training policy and culture. We support comprehensive bias training for all aviation workers and clear procedures for handling passenger complaints fairly and legally. Airport security companies implemented immediate policy reviews following Tony Russo's involvement in the incident. The security contractor firm that employed Russo terminated his contract and instituted mandatory civil rights training for all personnel working in airport environments. The viral nature of the incident created unprecedented visibility for airline discrimination as a broader social issue. Civil rights organizations reported receiving hundreds of complaints from travelers sharing their own experiences of discriminatory treatment, creating a database of incidents that had previously gone unreported. The NAACP announced that it was establishing an aviation equality task force to monitor discrimination in air travel and advocate for policy changes at both corporate and federal levels. The organization specifically praised Marcus Rivera's response as a model for how corporate leaders should address discrimination within their industries. Mr. Rivera's actions demonstrate that meaningful change requires leaders with both the power and the moral courage to confront discrimination directly, stated NAACP President Derek Johnson. His response creates a new standard for corporate accountability that we hope other industries will adopt. International media coverage extended the story's impact beyond American borders. The BBC featured the incident as an example of how social media could drive real-time accountability for discrimination. Canadian media outlets used the story to examine discrimination in their own transportation systems. European aviation authorities cited the incident when announcing their own reviews of passenger treatment protocols. Marcus Rivera's personal response to the immediate aftermath was measured and strategic. Rather than celebrating the viral attention or the positive business impact, he focused on using the moment to create lasting change. The goal was never to humiliate specific individuals, Marcus explained during an exclusive interview with CNN's Anderson Cooper the evening after the incident. The goal was to expose a pattern of discrimination that affects thousands of travelers and to demonstrate that such behavior will have immediate and serious consequences. Marcus announced that Atlantic Elite Airways would be donating $5 million to civil rights organizations focused on combating transportation discrimination. The company would also establish an annual scholarship program for students from underrepresented communities pursuing careers in aviation. This incident cost 4 people their careers, Marcus noted. But if it prevents hundreds of other passengers from experiencing similar discrimination, then something positive will have emerged from a very ugly situation. The immediate consequences were clear, comprehensive, and unprecedented in their scope. Within 24 hours, careers had ended, policies had changed, and an entire industry had begun examining practices that had been ignored for decades. But the most significant immediate consequence was cultural, the recognition that discrimination, regardless of who committed it or who experienced it, would no longer be tolerated without serious consequences. The Rivera Standard had been established, and the airline industry would never be the same. 6 months after Flight 891, Marcus Rivera stood before a packed auditorium at Harvard Business School delivering a keynote address that would become required viewing for business ethics courses across the country. The venue was symbolic, the same institution where he had earned his MBA 15 years earlier, when he was still a young entrepreneur, learning to navigate boardrooms where he was often the only person of color present. The question isn't whether discrimination exists in corporate America, Marcus told the audience of students, professors, and business leaders. The question is whether we have the courage to confront it when we have the power to create change. The 6 months following the Atlantic Elite incident had transformed both Marcus personally and the aviation industry as a whole. The changes were measurable, significant, and permanent. Atlantic Elite Airways had become the most profitable airline in Marcus's portfolio, with customer satisfaction ratings reaching a sustained 94%, the highest in the industry. The Dignity First initiative, implemented immediately after the Flight 891 incident, had created a new standard for passenger treatment that competitors struggled to match. Every Atlantic Elite employee now underwent 40 hours of mandatory bias awareness training, not as punishment, but as education. The training was designed not to shame, but to build awareness of unconscious prejudice and provide tools for treating all passengers with equal respect and dignity. We learned that discrimination isn't usually malicious, explained Dr. Patricia Williams, the civil rights expert, who designed Atlantic Elite's training program. Most often, it's the result of unconscious bias and cultural assumptions. When we teach people to recognize these patterns, they become capable of making different choices. The results were evident in every aspect of the airline's operations. Customer complaints related to discriminatory treatment had dropped by 89%. Employee satisfaction had increased by 34%, as staff reported feeling proud to work for a company that stood for equity and fairness. Most importantly, passengers of all backgrounds reported feeling welcomed and respected throughout their travel experience. The industry-wide impact had been equally remarkable. 12 major airlines had adopted similar Dignity First policies, recognizing that treating all passengers with equal respect wasn't just morally correct, it was good business. The Federal Aviation Administration had issued new guidelines requiring all commercial airlines to implement anti-discrimination training and establish clear procedures for handling bias-related complaints. Marcus's personal transformation was perhaps even more significant than the corporate changes. The young man who had once focused exclusively on building wealth and business success had discovered a deeper purpose in using his position to create meaningful social change. The incident on Flight 891 taught me that real leadership isn't about avoiding problems, it's about confronting them directly when you have the power to make a difference. Marcus reflected during a quiet moment in his office, looking out at the Miami skyline where Atlantic Elite's headquarters building bore his company's name. His office wall displayed a framed screenshot from Sarah Kim's TikTok video, the moment when he revealed his identity to the stunned passengers and crew. Below the image was a simple plaque with words that had become his personal motto. Dignity isn't something you earn. It's something you deserve simply by being human. The individual stories of those involved in the original incident had evolved in unexpected ways, demonstrating the complex nature of redemption, consequence, and personal growth. Carmen Rodriguez had found a new career path that surprised everyone, including herself. After months of soul-searching and community service, she had enrolled in a master's program in social work, specializing in diversity and inclusion counseling. Her personal experience with participating in discrimination had given her unique insights into how bias operated and how it could be addressed. "I spent 12 years in aviation thinking I was providing good customer service," Carmen explained during a speaking engagement at Miami-Dade Community College. "What I was really doing was perpetuating a culture that treated people differently based on assumptions about their worth. Learning that was painful, but it was necessary." Carmen's honest acknowledgement of her mistakes and her visible commitment to change had gradually rebuilt her reputation. She now worked as a consultant for companies implementing anti-bias training programs, using her personal story as a powerful example of how well-intentioned people could participate in discrimination without recognizing it. "The goal isn't to punish people for unconscious bias," Carmen told organizations seeking her guidance. "The goal is to help them recognize it and make different choices going forward." Jake Patterson's journey had been more difficult, but ultimately transformative. The loss of his airline career had forced him to confront not just his financial challenges but his own assumptions about privilege, fairness, and moral courage. Working 2 part-time jobs to manage his student loan payments, Jake had enrolled in night classes to become a high school teacher. His experience with discrimination, both as someone who had participated in it and as someone who had faced consequences for that participation, had given him a unique perspective on social justice education. "I teach my students that staying silent when you see injustice isn't neutral," Jake told his American history classes. "Silence is participation. When you have the opportunity to stand up for what's right, and you choose not to, you become part of the problem." Jake's classroom had become known throughout the school district for its inclusive environment and thoughtful discussions about civil rights, social justice, and moral courage. His personal story of failure and redemption resonated with students who recognized their own capacity for both mistakes and growth. Captain Michael O'Brien's story was more complex, reflecting the challenges faced by someone whose discriminatory actions had ended a long and previously distinguished career. The loss of his pilot certification and pension had forced O'Brien into early retirement with significantly reduced financial security. But the aftermath had also prompted deep personal reflection. O'Brien had enrolled in racial reconciliation workshops not because it was required, but because he genuinely wanted to understand how his assumptions had led to such harmful actions. "I spent 25 years thinking I was a fair person," O'Brien said during a support group meeting for people working to overcome racial bias. "I thought because I wasn't intentionally racist, I couldn't participate in discrimination. I was wrong." O'Brien had begun volunteering with a youth mentorship program in inner-city Boston, working with teenagers who reminded him of the young man he had failed to treat with dignity on Flight 891. The work was humbling and difficult, but it had given his later years a sense of purpose that his aviation career had never provided. Bradford Montgomery III's transformation had been the most dramatic and ultimately the most profound. The collapse of his real estate empire had been swift and comprehensive. Legal settlements in multiple discrimination cases had cost him over $4.7 million. The loss of corporate clients and property managers had forced him to sell most of his Manhattan properties at significant losses. His social isolation had deepened as former friends and associates distanced themselves from his toxic reputation. But rock bottom had proven to be the foundation for unexpected growth. Living in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Queens, a neighborhood he once would have considered beneath him, Bradford had begun attending racial reconciliation support groups. The process of confronting his lifelong assumptions about superiority and entitlement had been excruciating, but it had also been transformative. I spent 58 years believing I was better than other people because of my family name, my wealth, and my skin color, Bradford said during a community meeting focused on healing racial divides. I caused real harm to real people because of those beliefs. I can't undo that harm, but I can make sure I never cause it again. Bradford had begun working part-time at a community college teaching financial literacy to low-income students, many of them people of color who reminded him daily of the young man he had tried to humiliate on Flight 891. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who had once discriminated against others was now serving the communities he had previously disdained. The work was meaningful in ways his real estate empire had never been. I used to measure success by how much money I made and how many people I could exclude. Bradford reflected. Now I measure it by how many people I can help and how much I can contribute to healing the damage I once caused. The broader cultural impact of the Flight 891 incident had extended far beyond the aviation industry. The phrase Rivera Standard had entered the business lexicon as shorthand for immediate transparent accountability when discrimination occurred. Business schools taught case studies about the incident examining both the discrimination itself and the leadership response that followed. Social media platforms had added the incident to their archives of viral moments that created lasting social change. Sarah Kim's original TikTok video had been viewed over 47 million times and had inspired thousands of other users to share their own experiences with discrimination and injustice. The Flight 891 video showed people that discrimination could be confronted successfully, said Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a professor of social media studies at UCLA. It gave people hope that justice was possible and that speaking up could create real change. James Wilson, the lawyer who had documented the incident on Twitter, had used the experience to launch a nonprofit legal organization focused on transportation discrimination. His organization provided free legal representation to travelers who experienced bias-based mistreatment using the precedent set by the Atlantic Elite case to achieve successful outcomes for dozens of clients. Elena Santos had transformed her travel blog into a platform for documenting and addressing discrimination in the hospitality industry. Her following had grown to over 2 million across all platforms, and she had become one of the most influential voices advocating for equity in travel and tourism. The international impact had been equally significant. European airlines had implemented their own versions of bias training after the Flight 891 incident generated global coverage. Asian carriers had reviewed their passenger treatment policies. Airlines in Africa and South America had used the Atlantic Elite model to improve their own customer service standards. The Rivera incident became a global catalyst for change because it demonstrated that discrimination could be confronted immediately and effectively, noted Dr. Roberto Silva, who studied international business ethics at the London School of Economics. It showed that viral social media moments could create lasting institutional change. 2 years after Flight 891, Marcus Rivera returned to the same aircraft, now completely refurbished and bearing a commemorative plaque recognizing the historic events that had occurred there. He was traveling to New York for the opening of the Marcus Rivera Center for Transportation Equity, a research institute dedicated to eliminating discrimination in travel and hospitality. As he settled into Seat 1A, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The young man who had been humiliated and removed from this very seat had used that experience to create changes that would benefit millions of travelers for generations to come. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives become the most important, Marcus said during the center's opening ceremony. Not because the pain was necessary, but because our response to that pain can create meaning and positive change. The audience, which included Carmen Jake, Captain O'Brien, and even Bradford, listened as Marcus delivered the final words of his address. The seat in first class was never the real victory. The real victory was changing hearts, minds, and institutions, so that the next person wouldn't have to fight for basic dignity. When we recognize the humanity in each other, regardless of what we look like, where we come from, or what we're wearing, we all rise higher. The applause was sustained and heartfelt, but Marcus barely heard it. He was looking out at an audience that included people who had discriminated against him and people who had witnessed that discrimination. Most importantly, he saw people who had learned, grown, and committed themselves to ensuring that dignity would never again be denied based on appearance or assumption. The transformation was complete, but the work would continue. Because creating a more just world wasn't a destination. It was a daily choice to see the humanity in every person and to use whatever power you possess to protect that humanity for others. Marcus Rivera had learned that true power wasn't about exclusion or privilege. True power was about lifting others up, creating opportunities for justice, and ensuring that every person could travel through the world with dignity intact. The flight to New York departed on time with Marcus in his rightful seat, surrounded by passengers who understood that they had been witnesses to history and participants in change that would endure long after they reached their destination. This story reminds us that dignity isn't earned through wealth or status. It's the birthright of every human being. When we judge others by their appearance rather than their character, we diminish not only them, but ourselves. Marcus Rivera's quiet strength in the face of discrimination shows us that real power lies not in demanding respect, but in extending it to others even when they fail to extend it to us. The most profound changes often begin with ordinary moments of courage. A passenger who refuses to accept injustice, witnesses who document wrongdoing, and leaders who use their power to create lasting change. In a world where discrimination still exists, we all have the choice to be part of the solution or part of the problem. The choice we make defines not only who we are, but what kind of world we leave for those who come after us. Justice served with dignity creates change that lasts, and sometimes the person you underestimate today becomes the one who shapes your tomorrow. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Stories like this deserve to reach as many people as possible because they remind us that change is possible when we choose courage over silence and justice over convenience. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about standing up for what's right, and let us know in the comments. Have you ever witnessed discrimination? How did you respond? Your voice matters, and together we can create a world where everyone is treated with the dignity they deserve. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss these important stories. Because sometimes the most powerful lesson comes from watching someone turn their worst moment into the catalyst for meaningful change.